Previewing the Seahawks Week 7 matchup versus the Cardinals, Will Bruin nets a stoppage time equalizer to keep the Sounders on top of the West, and could the Seahawks be a landing spot for Antonio Brown? Let's take it around the sound. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Around the Sound. We have episode 12 on the way, so shout out to all the 12s. Of course, episode 12 of Around the Sound. It's good to be back. It's good to be back here with you guys. We're going to preview the Seahawks-Cardinals game. We're getting to the end of that bye week till we get some more Seahawks football. We saw Sounders-Timbers on Thursday night, an exciting 1-1 game. We'll talk about that later, but first, I do want to talk a little bit about Antonio Brown. AB, there's been a little bit of hubbub in the news lately about AB potentially coming to the Seahawks. We'll break that down. But before we get to any of that, I want to make sure that all of you guys are following me on Twitter at @ThePeytonThomas. Make sure you're caught up in everything that I'm involved in, and follow the Instagram for the podcast at Around the Sound Seattle. Make sure you don't miss a beat on anything Around the Sound. Of course, we have new episodes every Wednesday and Saturday of Around the Sound. And every episode of Around the Sound you can watch on YouTube at PTOM Media. That's PTHOM Media. Or you can listen to every episode of Around the Sound wherever you get your podcast. All right, let's throw it right into talking about Antonio Brown, of course. Everything is going well. The Seahawks are undefeated. They're 5-0. They are flying high, and they're heading into sort of the toughest part of their schedule, a real teller. So what's smarter than bringing in a locker room cancer cell to upset the roller coaster of everything that's been going well up to this point in the season? Because there's great locker room players, and the Seahawks do have a great locker room atmosphere, as far as I know, and as far as a lot of the insiders and analysts around the locker room know, is that culture, especially with Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. Those are great figureheads at the front of an organization, and as far as big personalities go for being in a locker room. And when you bring in not just locker room divas, like there's levels to this. There's great locker room players. There's sort of divas, which I would put Michael Thomas in that category for punching a teammate, or Le'Veon Bell. And then there's locker room cancers who really have the potential of disrupting even the greatest, most secure of franchises. Like Antonio Brown lost his opportunity to play for the New England Patriots when they had Bill Belichick and Tom Brady running their locker room. Antonio Brown is about one of the most toxic players you can add to an NFL locker room. And overall, the Seahawks and Russell Wilson really need to step away from the dumpster fire here. They really need to avoid upsetting the apple cart, bringing in Antonio Brown, despite all of the great ideas of this, what the receiving core could be if you take DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett and David Moore, all of these great receivers, and you add Antonio Brown to that list, thinking of how great all of these athletes could be on one roster. There's plenty of problems that come along with that too, not just the locker room problem, which I think I'll talk about first, but we'll get to the football part of it later. But I do want to talk a little bit about the history of Antonio Brown, what brought him to being suspended right now. He's going to be off of suspension and eligible to play in the NFL for 2 weeks. But let's take a look back at Antonio Brown's career just for a little bit to see how we got here exactly. So Antonio Brown, drafted in the 6th round in 2010 to the Pittsburgh Steelers. For the first 6 or 7 years of his career until 2017, went by without really a massive hurdle, without any significant problems off the field. He had very productive years from 2011 to 2017. He essentially rose to stardom. In 2017, he was, if not the best receiver in the NFL, at least top 2. Controversy started in 2017. He had a little bit of a locker room feud. In 2018, he was also fined for some civil lawsuit stuff. Apparently, he threw items off of his balcony of his apartment and almost hit a 2-year-old, some endangerment stuff there. He was then caught a few days later driving over 100 miles an hour in a 45. So this is where we start to have some minor problems on the field. He had some locker room incidents, and then we have some minor problems off the field with a civil lawsuit. And now comes time for the real juicy stuff, is in 2018. At the end of the season, his last season with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think it was the last week, it was week 17, he gets into a massive brawl with Big Ben Roethlisberger, quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have it out, they fight, they're not talking, there's a bunch of drama that goes on from both sides, and I will say Big Ben certainly contributed to the media circle surrounding this fight, and certainly could have done more, in my opinion, to de-escalate the situation. I remember while all of this was going on, getting news from the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room about all of this crazy stuff that's going on inside the fight between AB and Big Ben. But overall, Big Ben kind of won the battle, if you will, and won the right to stay on the Pittsburgh Steelers roster as Antonio Brown started skipping practices, got distance between him and a bunch of his teammates, and Brown goes to Oakland in 2019 after the season's over on a trade. So helmet nonsense with Oakland is the first thing that comes to mind as soon as you think of Antonio Brown's time with the Oakland Raiders. In training camp, he wanted to use his old helmet that was 10 years old at the time or something. The NFL said no. He missed essentially like 3 weeks of training camp trying to persuade the NFL to let him play with this old helmet. Then he's fined multiple times by the NFL and by the Raiders, but it seemed there was a period of time after he was fined and after the helmet thing, he had gotten over that. He had finally moved on to the whatever helmet the NFL wants their players to be playing with. And it seemed like the dust had settled for at least a few days. Everybody had apologized. It seemed like Brown had sort of made up with the ownership of the Raiders and with Gruden. And Gruden was kind of excited for Antonio Brown to see what Antonio Brown could bring to the Raiders offense that was really trying to find an identity at the start of 2019. Now that identity has very quickly become Josh Jacobs and Darren Waller, but at the time we thought that Antonio Brown was going to be the new identity of the Raiders offense. The very next day, after all of these things, after all of this dust settles and it seems like everything's fine, he posts a video on YouTube of his private conversation that Antonio Brown had with Gruden about his character, about his involvement in the team, about how Gruden thinks of Antonio Brown moving forward as far as like a personality, and exposed this private conversation between him and his coach that it's really a cardinal sin. You can't do that. Sharing a private conversation, it's detrimental to the team's success, and that's essentially what the Raiders ruled. The Raiders kept fining him big money for all of these small little things. As they accumulated, just kept fining him more and more until they eventually had to release him. He had $30 million guaranteed on his contract because he released the private video between him and Gruden. That $30 million is no longer guaranteed. It is void. He lost $30 million, and all he had to do was shut up, stop talking, and play football. He couldn't do that. He had to get into a brawl with some of his teammates and his coaches, eventually gets released by the Raiders after being even dumber on social media, trying to speed up the process that he could be released by the Raiders. We're a few weeks into the season now, last year in 2019. After he gets released by the Raiders, 1 day later gets picked up with the Patriots, and he plays one game for the Patriots. It seems like all could be going well. 2 days after signing with the Patriots, after his first game, yet another civil suit for Antonio Brown, yet another controversy. This one's about sexual assault, which of course is not okay in any sense of the word. Antonio Brown then suspended, released again, and that's kind of where we stand today. After that civil suit, the sexual assault suit came out, he's been suspended by the NFL for the first 8 games to start the 2020 NFL season. Last we had heard he had been released by the Patriots, but still working out. We'd heard a little bit of news about Russ and AB talking and working out during the offseason, and in all honesty, Russ has been very vocal about how much he likes AB and how everybody makes mistakes and how he deserves second chances. And look, I'm not a big fan of the cancel culture of getting rid of somebody after one mistake. I believe that people absolutely deserve second chances. People deserve to learn from their mistakes. People deserve to kind of get redemption, if that makes sense. But this isn't really a second chance for Antonio Brown. After we went through that laundry list, that massive list of all of the things that have happened in really not that long of a period of time, it started at the end of the 2018 season, and here we are in the middle of the 2020 season, and all of those things occurred on the field and off the field. It doesn't really seem to me like it's a second chance and like he deserves a second chance. It seems like a 10th chance or an 11th chance, or in terms of teams, it seems like a 4th chance because he forced his way out of Pittsburgh. He forced his way out of Oakland. He forced his way out of New England. Seattle, if they picked up Antonio Brown, that would be his 4th chance. So am I a fan of second chances? Absolutely. Am I a fan of 4th chances or 5th chances? That's where you're starting to get dicey, and you really have to look at Antonio Brown's character. You You really have to look at his history to decide whether you really think that this is beneficial for your team to bring in Antonio Brown, especially with all the success, the locker room, the culture, Russell playing, all of the success you've already been able to generate this year. You got to really ask yourself, does the reward really outweigh the risk of bringing in a player like Antonio Brown? And just as a human, not even as a football player, it seems like AB is kind of a jerk. Like, this guy's kind of a prick. He's not the most stand-up human being. He's not the guy that your mom would really want you to be friends with as a kid. He's the kid that you want to sort of stay away from, not be associated with because of all the garbage that he's gotten himself into. But let's talk about on the field now. The locker room's great. Does Antonio Brown screw that up? Maybe. Let's assume the best case scenario. Antonio Brown comes in ready to work, ready to assume his somewhat minor role on the team. Is it a minor role? Because that's the first thing that you have to think about. Look at the Seahawks wide receiver core right now as it stands. You have DK Metcalf. You have Tyler Lockett. You have David Moore. You have maybe Phillip Dorsett if he comes back. Freddie Swain's also in the mix, getting 1 or 2 catches a game. If Brown comes onto this roster and assumes his role, what is that role going to be, and how many touches is he going to get? Because this isn't the Saints offense where Russell Wilson or Drew Brees, the quarterback, drops back and throws 50 checkdowns a game. Russell Wilson rarely throws the ball over 30 times a game, most of them being deep shots, but, well, not most, but a significant portion of those being deep shots. But if Russell Wilson doesn't throw the ball 50 times a game, if he does throw the ball 30 times a game, who's going to get all of those catches? Who's going to get all of those targets? Because between DK Metcalf, Lockett, Moore, Dorsett, and those are just the wide receivers. Remember, we also have, the Seahawks also have Greg Olsen. They also have Will Dissly to feed. You can also use your running backs out of the backfield like Carlos Hyde in the passing game. There's only 30 throws. If you're only throwing the ball 30 times a game, there's only so many places you can go with the ball. And if Antonio Brown comes in, how much of that offense does he now get? How much of the offense is factored in now around Antonio Brown? Russell Wilson has such great chemistry with DK Metcalf, with Tyler Lockett, with David Moore, and those three guys seem to know the system really well and have they know Russell Wilson very well. At least it seems that way when you watch them play. It's very rare that you see those guys run the wrong route or Russ be frustrated because they did something that they weren't supposed to do, as far as maybe running a route or turning. It just seems like those guys are on the same page all the time, and I just wonder if coming in day one, Antonio Brown having to learn a new offense, having to catch from a new quarterback. Now, learning to catch with Russell Wilson is one of the best quarterbacks you could imagine, but still, it seems like it would be quite difficult for Antonio Brown to come in stride and really make a significant addition to the offense. And yes, of course, I know how great Antonio Brown was during the middle part of this decade. From 2014 to 2018, he really was at least a top 3 receiver in the league, if not for maybe 2016-17, probably the best receiver in the league. But he's now 32 years old. He hasn't played for about a year now, and he didn't really play consistently before that. So it's almost been like 2 years. It's been since the 2018 season that he's had a significant workload and a significant task week after week since he's played a real season. It hasn't been since the 2018 season. And can he really assimilate to this offense? Because the Seahawks offense is not like what the Pittsburgh Steelers used to run when he was there. It's not like what the Raiders were trying to run in 2019. And it's certainly not what the New England offense was trying to run in 2019. Russell Wilson is a completely different quarterback than all 3 of the other guys that Antonio Brown has been catching footballs from. It seems really far-fetched for Antonio Brown to come in at 32 years old and make that big of an impact. What about the other wide receivers? Do you think DK Metcalf? Do you think Tyler Lockett, who both of those guys are now really important team opinions? I think both of those guys play massive factors on how Russell Wilson performs, and they're both valued teammates. Do they really want Antonio Brown coming in and taking away some of their targets? Do they really want to work him into the slot? If he moves to the slot, does Tyler Lockett go to the outside? It would be really, really weird to see Antonio Brown come in at this point in the season, especially with how Russell Wilson's been playing, how the wide receivers as a whole have been playing. And wide receivers are one of the Seahawks' strong points this year. If you do have limited cap space left, which the Seahawks do, why would you spend more money in that position when you certainly have gaps on different parts of your roster? You could argue the D-line. Yeah, they're bringing in Snacks Harrison, but you could make a trade. There's more guys out in free agency you could bring in. If the Seahawks are willing to use that cap space this year in sort of a win-now mentality, I think it would be better served in other positions than wide receiver. Overall, like I said at the beginning of the episode, it seems like a dumpster fire. There's been so much news about it. There's been so much talk, so many Photoshop edits on Instagram of Antonio Brown in a Seahawks uniform catching passes. I really just don't think the risk outweighs the reward here. I don't think that Antonio Brown is capable of coming in, playing a sort of minor role in the offense, and really being a beneficial part of the Seahawks season in 2020. But next week, week 7 in the 2020 season, the Seahawks are at home against the Cardinals, coming off the bye week. The Arizona Cardinals coming off drubbing Dallas last week on Monday Night Football. So Cardinals only get 6 days of rest before this game. The Seahawks getting 2 full weeks due to having the bye week. This game, Seahawks-Cardinals, was moved to Sunday night. I think the Raiders were supposed to play on Sunday night beforehand, but they had some sort of COVID test. They had a positive COVID test, which put the game in slight doubt. And of course, the NFL wants that money. They want that Sunday night primetime slot. They don't want any danger of a Sunday night game being postponed, so they're swapping those 2 games. That means Seahawks-Cardinals is now the Sunday night primetime game, and with the Seahawks being 5-0 and the Cardinals being 4-2, it's probably the right call. These are 2 pretty good teams, and it should be a pretty good matchup. Historically, this series has been dominated by the road teams. Other than that crazy 6-6 tie a few years ago down in Glendale, the Seahawks have seemed to always win in Arizona since Russell Wilson came into the league. And it seems like Arizona always wins in weird fashion up in Seattle, but this game in Seattle, it's going to be interesting, especially if that trend continues with Arizona finding success against the Seahawks up in Seattle. Arizona looks like a pretty good team this year, and Kyler Murray looks really dangerous, but there are certainly places of this roster that lack. There's certainly parts of the Cardinals team that really is concerning. There's parts of the team that I look at and I say that's going to keep them from making any real dents into the NFC playoffs against teams like the Green Bay Packers or like the Saints or like the Seahawks. I don't think they're quite on that level yet. Let's talk about Arizona's secondary. They really haven't had a real test this year in the passing game. If you look at their 6 previous games, they haven't faced an offense like the Seahawks offense or like a quarterback like Russell Wilson. They've dealt with a little more running-based offenses, a little more short passing game. This is going to be the first game that the young Arizona secondary, young other than Patrick Peterson, who's got to be like 45 years old at this point, a great veteran, but getting slower, getting older. How effective can he be against a guy like DK Metcalf or somebody as fast as Tyler Lockett? Should be interesting to watch. But this is the first time that Cardinals secondary is really going to be tested for all 4 quarters, defending the deep ball. There's also Chandler Jones out, which is a massive blow to the Cardinals defense. Chandler Jones, one of the best pass rushers and run stoppers, an outside linebacker that can really do it all. Chandler Jones, he went out for the year with a bicep injury, a major hit to Arizona for their front 7 trying to face the Seahawks offensive line this week. On the other side of the ball, the Cardinals offensive line is really worrying. It's really bad. It's almost at that level of a 2017 Seahawks O-line bad. If Snacks Harrison is playing, which we haven't really gotten word yet whether Pete Carroll thinks Snacks Harrison will be ready for the game, how different does that make that front 4 look in pass rush? Can the Seahawks get to or at least contain Kyler Murray in the pocket, force him to make those tough throws, don't let him escape out of the pocket and scramble for 15, 20 yards a few times this game? It should be really, really a point of emphasis to get to the quarterback on those 4-man rushes. You're not going to have Jamal Adams for this game. You obviously don't have Bruce Irvin, who's out for the year. Both of those guys are probably your best number 1 guys if you're sending them on a blitz. Without those 2 guys, it's going to be not too much blitzing. It's going to be a lot of those 4-man rushes, especially in 3rd and medium, 3rd and long situations. In those situations, you have to get to the quarterback. You have to give your secondary a chance to cover. You have to keep the Arizona Cardinals from picking up the sticks, having 5 seconds in the pocket, and Kyler being able to find an open receiver like DeAndre Hopkins or like Larry Fitzgerald. And man, the Cardinals have a lot of talent on the offensive side of the ball. If Kyler Murray is able to get protection, he has his legs. He knows how to slide. He's a baseball player. He's got DeAndre Hopkins, one of the best wide receivers in the game. He's got Larry Fitzgerald, who seems to catch everything. They have Isabella, their 3rd receiver, who's made a pretty significant impact this year. Kenyon Drake. They also have Chase Edmonds. plenty of athleticism on that side of the ball for the Arizona Cardinals, plenty of weapons and options for Kyler Murray to go to. It's all about if he can get that protection for the offense to be moving consistently, not taking sacks, and being able to move the chains and score enough points. Russell Wilson's going to have to be pretty good to keep up with that high amount of athleticism on the other side of the ball on the Cards offense. It should make for a really fun Sunday night matchup. I would expect yet another shootout, yet another fun Seahawks game that finishes 35-32 or 40-38. It seems like that's been the story so far in the 2020 season for the Seahawks, but they have come out of every game, all 5 of their games, on the right side so far. I would expect yet another high-scoring game for the Seahawks on Sunday night. It should be fun to watch. Their first NFC West divisional game of the 2020 season. Let's move on to sort of the final talking point today. We saw a Sounders versus Timbers, the 4th edition of the Cascadia Derby in the 2020 MLS season this year. We saw that on Thursday night, and these are 2 teams that really could meet in the playoffs. They look like they could be 2 of the best teams in the Western Conference. You have a couple teams that are lagging right behind them, but if you look at the live table for the MLS right now, it's those 2 teams. It's Seattle and Portland sitting on top of the Western Conference. The playoffs this year for the MLS will most likely be on a points per game basis. Since the Sounders were able to net that equalizer in stoppage time, they stay on top of Portland, not just now, but they also have that game in hand, which means if they ended up on the same amount of points at the end of the year, as long as the Sounders have one less game played, they will retain that first seed due to the playoffs being shifted to a points per game basis because of the shortened season and COVID-19. There's some teams that won't be able to play all 23 of their matches in this condensed 2020 MLS season. So Seattle, because they were able to clinch that draw, really have the upper hand going down the stretch now. Decision day is November 8th. That's the last day of the regular season in MLS. So there's 4 games left for each of these teams, at least on the schedule. I don't imagine that Seattle will get that 5th game made up or scheduled in, which means we very likely will be looking back at the end of the 2020 MLS regular season with Seattle sitting on 22 games and Portland sitting on 23. Because they were able to nick that draw, that really gives Seattle the upper hand now to secure that number 1 seed in the Western Conference. They control their own destiny to that number 1 seed if they win out. Even if they drop a few points, I think Portland and Kansas City, the 2 teams behind Seattle in the Western Conference right now, are both very prone to dropping points as well heading down the stretch. As far as how the game played out, Flores for Portland struck in the 10th minute, and the Sounders were down 1-0 for the majority of the game. No shots on goal, not a single shot registered on target for the Sounders until the 91st minute, 92nd minute, whatever minute Will Bruin was able to put that goal away to tie it up. Credit to Bruin for being in the right spot. Will Bruin, of course, filling in for Raul Ruidiaz, who we talked about last episode, has flown back to Seattle but is still in that COVID protocol and is not yet able to play for the team. Sounders are still missing Ruidiaz, Svensson, and Arriaga due to international duty. Brad Smith and Jovan Jones are also still out to injury. If this Sounders team gets healthy, all of the internationals get back, those guys should be ready next week. We'll see about the injuries. If this Sounders team is able to get healthy before that November 8th date, that decision day date, when the regular season gets wrapped up, I don't really know if there's a better team, a team in the Western Conference in the MLS, more likely to make another MLS Cup run this year than the Seattle Sounders. If they're able to get everybody back, they are yet again a very, very strong team with a lot of depth and a lot of players capable of winning games. Should be fun to watch as the MLS season sort of comes down to the wire now. So we'll have to see what happens. All right, we kind of grinded through that relatively quickly. We had a decent amount of news to cover today, but we have a lot to look forward to. We got the Big Ten coming back this Saturday, which is one conference closer to getting the Pac-12 back in early November. We should have a Q&A next week. I know I keep promising you guys a Q&A, but we keep having more and more stuff come up. So if we have a slow news day early next week or maybe later next week, we should have a Q&A at least next week at some point. So make sure you're following at Around the Sound Seattle on Instagram to stay up to date with the podcast. Don't miss a beat. Don't miss the Q&A opportunity that is coming. I promise you guys, it will come at some point. Other than that, I guess I'll see you on Wednesday. We got plenty of stuff to watch. We'll have another NFL week, another week of college football. And of course, the World Series is still going on. The series is tied 1-1 at the time of recording this, but that's apt to change because there's supposed to be, I think another 2 or 3 games before the next episode of Around the Sound. So until then, stay safe and thanks for listening.